Start this. Well, we'll get started, and when Ty jumps in, he can join in, and hopefully he'll be here by the time you have to head out, Katie, and he'll just step in and fill in same way. So thank you all for tuning in. Again, as I say every week, if you can turn your cameras on, we appreciate it, and please do so that the panelists can see who they're talking to. On the call today, we have our Sage Core team as usual, but we have Katie Castleton, a Sage Core alum and current consultant. I'll let her introduce herself in a moment. As well as Martin Moon, who's also a Sage Core alum and currently working as the VP of Operations at Noken, which some of you may know him as, but previously was a consultant, so he'll introduce himself as well. So yeah, on that note, we're happy to have you here. Obviously, consulting is an industry that is appealing to a lot of kids out of college. I myself went right into consulting, and it's this industry that feels like it covers a wide variety of topics. You don't really know what it means until you're in there, but you know that it's hopefully an opportunity to learn a lot in a short amount of time is kind of the way I looked at it. So hopefully on today's panel, Katie and Martin, and when Ty jumps in, we'll be able to illuminate really what that means as an industry and what you can expect and how you can position yourself to land a role, hopefully, if it's what you're interested in. So without further ado, let's have them introduce themselves and give a little bit of background of where they are and where they've been. So Katie, why don't you go first?
Yeah. So hello, everyone. I'm Katie. I'm a Sage Core alum from 2017. So did my sophomore year of college. I was in the Dublin program. And then I was also the Dublin orientation leader last year. I graduated from University of Michigan in 2019 with my bachelor's in industrial and operations engineering. I'm currently an associate at PwC out of Chicago. I sit within technology consulting for consumer markets companies, more specifically focusing on e-commerce transformation, mostly for digital strategy. And right now I'm doing a digital marketing and promotions role. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Awesome, thanks. And Martin, if you can.
Hey, my name is Martin. I was actually one of the original Sage Core alums or Sage Core teams. I think it was back in 2014. So I was for the guinea pig kind of format, but worked out great. We went to Argentina for the tech startup. Great experience. I graduated out of Dartmouth 2016 with a degree in physics. Afterwards, I joined as a general analyst at McKinsey in New York. About the second half of the year, I joined mostly aligned with the strategy practice there, so mostly focusing on strategy projects. And now I'm a VP of Ops at a small but fast-growing tech travel startup called Noken.
Yep, and I think a couple of our interns are interning with Noken. Sierra's on the call, been working with Martin as well. So cool for them to
yeah, Sierra.
Maybe they didn't know you came from consulting originally, maybe they did. But either way, very, very great. So thanks for being here and thanks for sharing that. So, moving forward, consulting, like I said, is this kind of this black box. We hear about it as an undergrad. You have all these firms coming to recruit. You don't really know what it means. You go and network, but for everyone that's on the call, they're obviously interested in consulting or in one way or another. So I think what's a great place to start is kind of, let's start with breaking into the industry and then we can go into what it's like there. So just in terms of if you can think back to when you were recruiting for roles, kind of the things you did to position yourself to network within consulting and how you made an impression on recruiters and prepared yourself to ultimately land a position. And this may not be overly specific, it may be generic networking advice, but I think it's still an issue or a topic that gives a lot of people anxiety. So I think it's a good place to start. Martin, why don't you take the lead on this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think everything, I think in the past kind of couple of years, as I have advised, other friends and, underclassmen on going consulting, I quickly realized that while consulting might be kind of a gigantic umbrella of a variety of things, it really depends on the type of consulting you do and type of firms that you decide to join. So I just want to qualify everything I say, kind of, I think, more testifies to management consulting advice. So some of the firms like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. So just FYI. Having been an active part of the recruitment process when I was actually at McKinsey, I think when it comes to the question of networking, obviously, just like anything in life, being able to somewhat add to your network of folks that have been in consulting or currently in consulting and getting to know the recruiting team as well as the other kind of associates and managers they bring in to talk to you is helpful. But you need to make sure that whenever you have an hour with them or you have a coffee chat with them or lunch, your goal can't be, let me try to make an impression, because really in the recruiting process, that really doesn't get factored in until maybe the very end when you almost have the job and you might get extra value points, right? So the main focus, I think, whenever you have an opportunity to network and learn about people at the firm, is really kind of learn about what is the actual work like. Be able to really kind of develop a genuine interest in, hey, I'm interested in this firm because they do this type of work. The day-to-day sounds like this. I don't know, their working hierarchy seems like this, and be able to really talk to them and believe that that is what you want to do. And I think being able to gather kind of real evidence there also will help you get a better sense of if this is the firm or the vertical or industry you want to join. But also, it comes off as something actually that adds to the conversation if you're in the case of interviewing or so. So I think that's just my note regarding networking.
Awesome. That's great. And Katie, why don't you share, you obviously PwC has a wide range of practices, and you sit in the technology group. So I don't know if networking obviously is universal, but if there's any different things you did to kind of demonstrate your competencies in that area, but also just general networking tips will suffice here.
Yeah. So I think for me, I always joke that I'm not a typical consultant, however you take that, because I wasn't in the business school at Michigan, and a lot of my current coworkers came from that. I think so for technology consulting, how I was able to approach it is just in a way that I was not the typical candidate, and I wasn't going to shy away from the fact that I wasn't, because I was an engineer and had other experience. That is something that made me a little bit of a unique candidate. And so I wasn't going to pretend that I had all the business knowledge, and was very upfront that what I was interested in terms of technology, and in that, instead of just kind of more of a strategy role. So it was partly, I think, self-awareness of that I, one, probably could not get a strategy kind of job because I didn't have the experience, but also that, like, I think some coming in with being very genuine. And I'm on the Michigan recruiting team, and I always say this to all the students I talk to, is that goes a long way if you're genuine. And it's really easy to tell if the student is actually interested in like PwC or McKinsey or whatever, is that if student comes to me and they're just looking for a big name, it's really easy to tell because they have no actual reasons for wanting to work at PwC. And I was really like, why PwC? And if they can give me like specific reasons or really genuine about that they're exploring, then that goes a lot farther than some of the students who just kind of are going for it for the name. So if that makes sense.
No, I think that is critical. I think it's something I was in the business school of Michigan. It's something I saw in some recruiting events. You could just see if you were in a group conversation with yourself and two other students and someone from the firm, and I could at least feel when one of my classmates was just coming off as extremely disingenuous or for lack of a better term, brown nosing and things like that. I mean, obviously, you want to show genuine interest and do acknowledge the other person in the room. I think a key tip with networking at the end of the day is that people are people, right? They have interests outside of their role at PwC, outside of their role at McKinsey that make them who they are. And the more you can tap into that, the more likely they're going to remember you than asking the millionth question about what it's like to be a consultant at enter firm. So keep that in mind as well. Because obviously things that make Martin and make Katie that aren't their 9 to 5 or frankly, probably 9 to 7, speaking better consulting. And let's transition and talk a little bit about that. I think before we go into a day in the life, because we're going on this path of landing a role, I think it's important to briefly talk about kind of consulting interviews and the case interviews. I know that's a big component when we're talking about McKinsey, Bain, BCG. You're not going to land a role there unless you've gone through a case. And I think, other firms are following suit as well. I personally did an interview with Accenture, PwC, and everyone else of the world. But Katie, why don't you talk about your interview experience and what that process was like? And then Martin, if you want to dive into deeper with the cases.
Yeah. So to start out, I know the current state of the world, PwC is doing a huge initiative right now. We're transferring all of our recruiting to online, being virtual for the fall, which I know is a huge change because there's not going to be a career fair and all of that. So our first thing is that we're here for the students. So like the fact that it's virtual and just throughout the interview process, like we're trying to make this as best for you as possible. And so don't be nervous. I know that's like the stupidest advice ever, because of course you're going to be nervous, but trying to be relaxed will go a long way. But kind of for the interview process, I know speaking from PwC is we're big on, we do the behavioral and we do the case. And the behavioral is very standard. We're not trying to trick you. Just want to know how you learn to work in a team environment. I mean, in the end, we're going to put you in front of the client, like a client, you're probably your first week, if not the first day. And so overall, what I look for and what the interviewers look for is that if I feel comfortable putting a student in front of a client as soon as they start, then that goes a long way. So just being professional, being engaging, I think is big for the interviews. And then our cases are a little less intense, I would say. Probably shouldn't say that, than some of the bigger strategy firms like McKinsey. At least for technology consulting, I can't speak for strategy but it's more of a, how do you solve this technology problem, and can you explain to us your reasoning? Less of a, we need you to calculate a market size of something. So PwC's cases are a little bit more thinking through, we want to see your thought process.
Awesome. Thanks for the insight. And so good segue there, Martin, if you want to go into what are, maybe more intense, and don't worry, we won't go back to PwC and say you said anything, Katie, but talking about, what those case interviews are and what they look like, and what someone on the other side of the room is expecting to see out of you.
Yeah, actually, Sierra and I had a conversation about this, so I'm going to repeat a couple of things I told you. But yeah, I think like Katie said, the interview splits into two components. We call it fit, we call it behavioral, and then there's the case. Just a couple notes on the fit. Whenever I interview, whenever I would advise folks on interviewing, like how I would just take the fit and prep for it is, it is just, you should treat the interviewer as another person, and you're trying to essentially entice them. They've been interviewing for hours and for days, and to you're just another candidate. So for those 15 minutes, if you could spice up their life, you're going to make a good impression. So one of the things, this might be too tactical, but one thing I always advise is like have really good stories from things in your resume. People are human. People love good stories. So whenever you have an opportunity, and they ask you about a working environment where you, displayed your teamwork capabilities, always make sure to tell a good story rather than trying to list out bullets or repeat things that are in your resume. Again, they're human beings. They want to be entertained, essentially. And then regarding the case, I assume you guys have had some sense of what they are. Essentially, it is a question posed in the context of some business problem, and they have essentially a series of information they're hoping you would ask, and through kind of a back and forth exchange, you're trying to get to an answer. So an example would be, hey, the case is that this company has a profitability problem. Can you help them solve it? And obviously, because it's a profitability problem, they want you to first break down into revenue and cost, and then deep dive into each one of those and try to help uncover what the actual problem is. So at the end of it, you can say something confident like, hey, after evaluating all of the business, it seems like the reason your profitability has disappeared is because the cost of your manufacturing product has gone up X%, and then case closed, right? But taking a step back and getting away from the lingo, like what Katie said, like what a case interview is actually just trying to get a sense for like, how do you think as a person? Like they don't care about the lingo of like profitability or like margins, like they don't care about any of that, which is why, like, if you ever see the background of a lot of successful consultants, they're not necessarily coming from business or econ, there's history majors, English majors, because it really comes down to, could you do structured thinking, right? So I think that's kind of, there's a lot of things to practice that. I'm not sure this is the time to kind of go into it, but, again, please take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is just my point of view. Like, if you do want to practice for interviews, like, I really do not recommend you buy one of those books and spend time reading instead you should be flexing your brain to try to do as much structured thinking as possible. I'll give you an example and shut up. Again, like it's, I know that you don't typically have business problems on a day-to-day basis for you to try to test this, but you are constantly solving problems on a day-to-day, whether you're in school, whether you're at home. That is very similar, and I think you can use those cases to actually try to flex those. So the example that I had given Sierra when we're talking was when I was back in college and in a fraternity, and we would all be kind of prepping for interviews. One of the things that we used to do is trying to kind of apply that thinking to something as simple as, hey, we're having a party with the sorority and we need to figure out how many cases of beer to buy, right? And instead of going with a simple case of like, all right, let's just buy 30 and move on, we would try to be like, all right, well, how do we actually get to an accurate number, right? And you say, okay, well, what is the variables that go into determining how many beers you need for the night? It is the number of people who are drinking and the rate that they drink at. Okay, well, let's first break that problem into those two components. And then let's pick the people. Let's break that into further, right? Okay, well, I'm going to make an assumption, verify with the interviewer that this is a good assumption, that say that guys and girls drink beer at a different rate, right? So that I'm going to make that split and say that that's going to impact the rate that I assume. And you keep breaking it down so that you come out with this like nice equation and say, hey, Mr. Interviewer, Mrs. Interviewer, I'm going to now plug in information, and what I get is about 30 Ks. And then again, they don't care about the 30 Ks. They don't even care about the assumptions. What they care about is the fact that you were able to take a problem that seemingly seemed kind of difficult to solve, push it down into smaller pieces where you could agree with them on, okay, this is how you could deconstruct the problem and get to a more scientific answer and move on, compared to, the problem being, hey, how many cases of beer should I buy? And you being like, okay, I think there's about 100 people and each people drinks 2 beers, so 200 beers, right? The interviewer will say, okay, that's an answer and move on. But again, you've actually failed because the interviewer has no idea how you actually think and approach problems. So I think that is the basic of interviews. So if you can, any opportunities, right? Like it's the same thing as market estimation size problems or whatever they're called. When someone says like estimate how many diapers are sold in each year in the U.S. And obviously no one knows that answer exactly, but you could try to make assumptions and be very clever and try to get to a scientific answer and impress them, be like, wow, this person knows how to think critically. So I would just say whenever you have free time, practice in those, don't waste time reading books. And then when you get to the interview or when you try practice interviews, you realize it is the same type of thinking, just with a layer, of a business kind of veneer over it.
Awesome. It's great advice, Martin. So appreciate that. Don't tell yourself you have to shut up because I think it's important for everyone to hear, especially if they're going down this path of what the interviewer is looking for. And so some examples in your own life right now, right? You're dealing with COVID, but some problems you can look at is think about how businesses have to stock toilet paper or paper towel, or how much paper towel or toilet paper you need to get through COVID, assuming you don't leave your house. Little things like that you can start to think about critically in the same way Martin just laid out the beer example, which is great and extremely relevant to a group of college students. So appreciate keeping it real for them. Katie does have to leave soon. She has a hard stop due to a client meeting, which is part of the life. And before she heads, I do want to talk a little bit about a day in the life. And Martin, I'll help support on the panel and speak to my experiences as well, so you're not out there alone once she heads out. But we live in a COVID world right now, but it's not going to be permanent. We don't know how long it will be, but it won't be permanent. So I do want to talk about a day and week in the life of a consultant as it is before shutdowns, before COVID, and what that looks like from a lifestyle perspective, because I think it's an important part that they all need to consider as they decide whether or not this career is right for them. So Katie, before you have to hop, why don't you give your insights and experience?
Yeah, so I actually was both on a traveling project. So for most of last fall I was traveling, and then I was local. So I do have both perspectives of that. So while you're traveling, typically in a week, you leave Monday. My team was really nice and let us take a 7 a.m. flight instead of the 6. So most teams leave at the 6 a.m. We left at 7. I flew to Philly. So I went from Chicago to Philly, got there around noon. And then we drove straight to the client site, worked there until like 7, and then would go back and check into our hotel. Sometimes we'd all grab dinner together. Sometimes we would just order food. And then you work on the client site Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Thursday, we would usually, depending on the client, they let you leave sometime in the afternoon. Depending on which client leadership was there, we'd either take like the 3 p.m. or the 5 p.m. flight back to Chicago. fly back to Chicago, get back. The traffic from O'Hare, if anyone lives in Chicago, is horrendous at 5 p.m. So I was getting in about an hour of work on my way home in the Uber, and then get back home Friday. You can either, at PwC, we have a really strong office culture in Chicago. So we were able to, I always would go to the office if I could on Fridays. A lot of companies, consulting firms, you can work from home. We're allowed to. We would always choose to go in because the Chicago office for PwC has happy hours every Friday at 4 p.m. So that was always really fun. So Friday is the day for catching up, doing a little bit of client work, but also doing some of the other work you have to do for the firm. So working on different projects, like I work on Michigan recruiting, so do my calls for that, get coffee with some people, network. So that was general my schedule for when I traveled. Now I was local for actually about 4 months from December to March at a large airline in Chicago was my client, and was able to, so I just commuted downtown every day, which I loved. So just went downtown to the office, and it was a little bit better because I had more normal hours because I didn't fly in. But yeah, that's the general day in the life. It's pretty standard. Now that I'm remote, it's a little bit easier because no commuting, no flying. So don't hate that.
Cool. And before you hop, what would be a tip that you would provide to anyone going into it to kind of overcome the rigorous travel schedule or dealing with long hours and things like that?
Yeah, so I think a big tip, and I learned this early on, is which it sounds silly, I have 2 sets of all of my like toothpaste and all of that. So I like never unpacked my toothpaste and like shampoo and conditioner. So it just makes packing a lot easier because I would get home, switch out my clothes on Thursday, and so I'd be all packed to go on Sunday. So as silly as that sounds, it saves you like an hour every Sunday if you had to like unpack and repack. So that definitely helps. Long hours, honestly, when you're on the client site, it's a lot easier to deal with because when you're traveling, you can expense things. So we could expense Starbucks, and you can pay for the more expensive latte and just little treats for yourself. That helps while traveling for me is getting a like good takeout for lunch or something. Great.
Yeah, so there are the perks amidst the crazy travel. I know you have to hop so you can take off and head to your client meeting. I'll share out your contact information so those here, if they have questions, can email you and maybe set up time to chat further about things. But thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you later. And so switching over now, Martin, if you want to talk about your experience, day in the week in the life, at McKinsey and what that was like for you and tips and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, of course. I'm a bit jaded when it comes to traveling and consulting, but I'll try to be objective. Regarding the weekly schedule, what Katie laid out is pretty accurate. You head out usually Monday morning, like bright and early, because you want to be there when the clients get into their office to start the week. And then you head out Thursday evening, and then you do your Friday in the firm. Regarding just like travel, like, when I was at McKinsey, I got to do some really cool projects in very interesting places. I had a strategy study in Jamaica. I did a strategy study in Korea. And there's a lot more other cool opportunities for me to do so, just being as part of the strategy practice. But I also did long nights in small Chicago suburbs like Lyme. So, it's a good balance, and you can take what you can get. Regarding I don't say, essentially, my take is that travel is fun. At first, it's super awesome. You have a huge expense account and you get to build all your mileage. You never have to pay for hotels during your vacations and all that kind of stuff. But quickly, it does wear you down. And then when the novelty wears off, all you're wishing for is to, be in the bed for which you're paying rent, be able to, like, after work, go grab drinks during a weekday with friends, right? So you kind of start wanting that, and depending on what office you're in, you get to kind of, at least for McKinsey, during my kind of second half, starting my second half of my first year, I really got to start dictating whether I wanted local and travel projects because I brought, a good amount to the table. And the trade-off decision you're just making is by limiting yourself to a city, you're essentially limiting on the number of projects you could do. So I was in New York, so I was like, hey, I want to stay in New York. So a lot of my projects beginning was like a lot of finance, banks and things like that. But as long as you're willing to make that trade-off, which I think it's worthwhile, that kind of, you go there. And then regarding coping with it, like I say this because I get to say this because I'm not in the firm anymore, but like I used to like really milk the expense account. I used to be like, well, if I'm going to get away from my firm on a weekday, like I'm going to like max out my expense account at the bar after work or get a ribeye and things like that. So like if little wins help you. This last point on how the day looks, I'll go into a little more detail than what Katie had mentioned. Imagining you're at the client side, you're starting your day even in a local project. You usually start with a check-in with your team. Usually teams, how the team is structured in a typical consulting project is that you have essentially a director who is a guy who kind of got the gig for the firm, right? He knows the CEO, and the CEO called on him or her to get the project going. And then you have partners who kind of are the masterminds of, the ones with the brilliant ideas, knows the clients really well, and has worked with many projects. But the day-to-day is a team built of analysts and associates, and that is a team that is always, while partners and directors are constantly flying in and out, jumping from clients to clients, you and your manager are assigned to the project until they're finished. So every morning you have a check-in with your manager and your other teammates. You kind of cover what you're doing, meetings you have. Everyone, usually consulting gigs are kind of structured, or whenever a manager scopes out a project, they assign different work streams. So that's part of the scoping of the project. They'll scope and say, hey, this project requires 3 work streams. That's why we need 3 analysts. So for your work stream, you kind of figure out, you talk about what you're going to accomplish that day, what meetings you have. Let's say hypothetically, you guys like finished a draft of the deck last night. You might have a early morning meeting with a key client, reviewing what we realized. They can provide feedback, tell you, hey, this number doesn't look right, look into it. And then after that meeting, each of you guys go off, talking to your client, trying to figure out whatever analysis you have to do, whatever information you have to collect, whatever you need to synthesize or iterate with the client. And then maybe you grab lunch, and at 2 p.m., the partner flies in. He's only there for the night. So you go over everything that, and you have problem solving sessions where they tell you, hey, do this, do this, do that. And then by the end of the day, you kind of have a series of things to do. You have analysis that, your client told you to do. You have iterations on the deck based on feedback. You kind of get a sense for what you have to do for that evening, go back to your hotel, milk that expense account, and then usually come back online, finish what you need to, and then start the day over again. So that's that.
Awesome. I appreciate the in-depth look, because it is more than just you show up and you work till 7. There's usually a rigorous schedule behind that, and you're subject to, at any point, a client potentially wanting to speak to you about something you're working on or having to present to them and things like that. I think, it's important to understand that, and I appreciate your candid and frankly jadedness towards traveling, because I think it's important perspective for the students to hear, because it does wear on you. So I worked in consulting for over a year for a management tech firm called Clarkston Consulting, and I was on a local project the entire time, but I actually traveled as much as it was quote unquote local, because I lived in Chicago, but I was traveling to Northbrook, Illinois, a northern suburb. And so I was taking a metro train out to the suburbs every day, traveling about an hour and a half round trip. For the same reason Martin said, I couldn't justify getting a hotel in a northern suburb when I was paying for rent in downtown Chicago, and I wanted to be able to come home and get a drink and eat and enjoy the city I was living in. But the early mornings and constant travel and feeling exhausted at the end of the day is a real thing. But like Martin said, you also get these benefits of hotel points and travel points. And I'm sure Martin still has long-standing status from a lot of his experiences at some of the brands, that he was loyal to, whether it was Delta or Marriott or whatever it is. And you heard him say, when he went on vacation, he doesn't have to pay for a hotel room. He's going on vacation, he's using points. So you get that benefit if you're willing to put up with it and stick it out for a certain period of time. So really appreciate that. And so I think, you know, given where we're at, I think Ty was not able to show up for some reason. We'll find out. We'll hope all's the best. But given that said, and just the perspective and where we're at, I don't want to just have Martin talk about his own experience, but I think at this point it just makes sense for you all to ask any questions you have and what you might want to learn, and either of us can address them and answer them. So we might wrap up earlier than anticipated, which is great. You all can get back to your days, but now would be a great time if you have any specific questions about consulting, about the big three, about, you know, transitioning to life after consulting, right? Martin's running operations for, like you said, a fast growing startup that we work with at SageCore. Any of those things, I think now would be a great time to ask those questions and learn more about what you want to learn. So if anyone has questions.
I have a question.
Nice.
By the way, I like your hair.
Thanks. It's my Corona flow. I'm trying to cut it. Excuse
That's
my,
what I'm wondering.
I look so unkempt.
I think I'm actually going to grow mine out too. But question. I've kind of like met or come into contact with a lot of people just around in my alumni network as well, who are kind of like former consultants. And I'm wondering, especially because big consulting firms take on a lot of associates at sort of like the entry level. It seems like there's a lot of entry and exits into the industry. And for someone who's like not entirely sure of where their career path will take them, does it make sense to go into an industry like consulting just for the exit opportunities?
That's a good question. Let me see how. I think the exit opportunities is definitely great for consulting, and maybe that's something to consider separately. But maybe I can maybe talk to you a little more about my background and how I ended up going to consulting. So I never intended to join a consulting firm. I've always been kind of this like, you know, obsessed with entrepreneurship, like part of startup clubs, like trying to start stuff with friends. And I always thought that that's where I would go off the pure kind of fact of I just really enjoy being able to be this like unproven person, but be able to like have impact right away and be able to have a lot of say and things get implemented. And that just kind of excited me. So instead of the typical climb up the corporate ladder to get that capability, why don't I come in on the ground floor, do it, and again, get that early, obviously taking on the risk of it not succeeding, what have you. So that world was really exciting to me. And that's what I was gunning for. And then corporate recruiting came around, and as you guys all may have already experienced, you know, corporate recruiting is really easy. If you have a resume, all your friends are going to be doing it. You know, when your resume comes around, you just drop it. So I took a chance at McKinsey, and I got the gig. And you know, I did it as a summer internship and got a full-time offer at the end of it. And when I was because I actually interviewed during the winter, I had my full-time offer, but still had my junior summer to do something. So during my junior summer, when I had kind of McKinsey in the bag, I was like, well, I really got to figure out, like, is startup something I don't want to do right now? So a friend of mine was starting this sweater company. It's like before direct to consumer was big. And I joined him in SF for the summer to just work on it. And he was working out of his living room, like sweaters everywhere and stuff. And I did it. We did everything from taking customer service calls in a day and having investor meetings at night. And I got the full experience of it. But when it was time for me to make a decision on which to go, you just realize that at the end of the day, while the startup doors will always be open for you, entry to a firm is really not, right? Like it's exponentially more difficult to get into a place like McKinsey a couple of years out rather than coming in right after you graduated when you're given the benefit of the doubt, right? Like let's say you do 2 years and you come back in, initially you're not being compared against other students, you're being compared against other they call experienced hires. So you better have done something crazy good, right? During those 2 years for you to kind of get that in, right? So recognizing that, you know, I decided to go with consulting. Now, you know, one more, I think, fact, I think to answer your question, Sebastian, would be the fact that when you don't know what you want to do, consulting is such a great thing, simply because consulting teaches you how to do what I mentioned, structured thinking. And it's often, I think, kind of maybe understated as a soft skill, right? While folks are learning supply chain management, these specific hard skill sets that seem sellable, something like being able to communicate ideas clearly or tackle a problem with ambiguity and know how to actually move forward with it rather than kind of feel paralyzed by the monstrosity of the problem, right? And that is something you just do constantly in consulting. You constantly get different problems in which you need to teach yourself up on the lingo, on the industry, on everything. But why people hire consultants is the idea that when you have the same amount of information as a client does, can you solve the problem differently than they can, right? So you get to constantly push yourself. Like it's the beer example I give. Can you apply that kind of thinking to everything? Because especially in the startup world that I'm in now, we face problems that I've never faced on a daily basis, right? I've never done this before. But there's no one else to do it, so I got to do it. Where do I go to start? And you apply that structured thinking. So, I think the exit opportunities are what they are, because while it might seem a bit weak on paper, that's what you're kind of showing off as what you accomplished, like other businesses or whatever other opportunities you might be considering, recognize how important that is. So just to be able to kind of develop that confidence and say, hey, I can do that. If you don't know what you're doing, it's always a very safe bet. Yeah.
Thanks,
Cool.
Martin.
Thank you.
Great question, Sebastian, and a really thorough answer, Martin. I think it's important to consider. I think Martin hit on a really key point I want to echo on. Consulting is a great place to go when you actually don't know what you want. Like, I think that is you see that you'll network with a lot of people who are interviewing, or if you enter a firm and realize that you're all kind of in that boat, because you get exposure to a lot of different industries and a lot of different problems. And then you can start learning about yourself, or what are the problems that I like to solve? What are the industries that make me excited? Am I really interested in supply chain and solving those problems, or am I really more interested in consumer brands and branding and strategy in that sense? So, and your ability to gain exposure across those fronts is unique to an industry where you're working on a new project every 6 months. If you go join a firm, a big CPG firm, a consumer goods company, or an airline, or whatever it is, you're going to be placed into a business unit, whether it's marketing, sales, supply chain, and you're going to work within that unit. You may have cross functionality on your projects and have to communicate, but you're not really going to have the opportunity to solve problems in the other unit. Whereas consulting will give you that opportunity even within the same firm or same client. So a great question. And in terms of exit opportunities, I think that a lot of firms look to consultants because they know what they're going to get in terms of structured thinking. When I left consulting, I went to go work at DoorDash and strategy, and I got recruited by them because I had consulting on my resume, and they sent me a cold email, and I went through the process. But I don't think I would have even made the list of the drip if I didn't have consulting on my LinkedIn or resume to begin with. And obviously everyone knows how DoorDash has grown and where it is today. So that opportunity was incredible, and you can take the learning and apply it to a company that's growing like a Noken, like a DoorDash. So great question. Thank you for the answer, Martin. That's my 2 cents as well. Rohan, it looks like you might have a question if you want to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. So one question that I have is, I know you touched a lot about the work experience and how you really get a knack for problem solving, structured thinking, and overall intellectually stimulating work. But I'm curious as to what the mentorship you receive is like, because I've heard nothing but great things about McKinsey's mentorship as well as other firms.
Yeah. Regarding it's weird because I think I don't necessarily have, one of the things they do is they invest a lot in the network. I think really all firms, right? Because at the end of the day, consulting is a people business, right? Like, and it really is, right? Like, even yourself, whenever you present yourself to clients, you are to some extent playing a sales role, right? What you're trying to avoid doing is when whoever kind of junior client that you're working with on day to day, like, you want that interaction to go in a way where at the end of the day, that junior client goes to their boss and say, hey, working with Martin has been like a pleasure and he's really helping us, rather than like, oh my gosh, like he is micromanaging me and like asking for data that's not really relevant, blah, 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 right? So because of that, they really invest a lot into making sure that the folks that kind of go out and represent the firm actually are, have a good sense. And again, how you do that is obviously pass down the knowledge from, folks who have been there longer. But regarding, let me try take at answering it. Mentors come out naturally because unlike, let's say one of you guys reached out to me and was like, hey, I want to stay in touch and ask you questions. Like, sure, you and I can be like mentor and mentee reality, but until you have had like an opportunity to work together and kind of face challenges, like there's no real kind of intimate connection between us, right? That's very different in consulting when essentially the partners that you work with, the managers that you work with, and even the directors who are super busy, but still they recognize good talent. Whenever something good happens, if you chase it down, like at the end of the day, it's because of analysts and associates and managers are actually doing the job. They found the analysis, they killed the presentation or what have you, right? And whenever you see things like that, like you are essentially building, I think, long time networks with people that, again, are really smart and have been in the industry and have seen a variety of things. So I think, yeah, just naturally from that, although I was one of those like prideful kids. I regret not taking more advantage of it. But there would be all these like mentorship programs at McKinsey that would be like, hey, if you're interested in like healthcare tech, come to this lunch on Friday, meet mentors. And I would like always skip those and rather like go hang out with friends and such. But even without that, I have all these kind of partners and managers that I had worked with very closely who now I look back and sometimes whenever I run into a problem, I would get their thoughts on it. When I was trying to scale an offshore CX team, I really didn't know like where to begin. I knew one of my partners that I worked with had done a project there, so I gave him a call and like we talked about it briefly and such. So you got to get that, and you get to naturally and organically build a network that is a mix of people that might stay in the firm, but also partners, managers, and people you meet also have dreams of their own. So they end up doing like, the partner that I worked with closest, like, throughout my tenure, started his own nutrition startup a couple months ago, right? And being able to hop on the call and like, him kind of really giving me the benefit of the doubt because he knows the work that I've done and he knows how capable, and being able to like kind of spit back ideas and, it not be this like mentor-mentee relationship. I mean, those types of relationships are the ones that I think are the most worthwhile and going to contribute the most, I think, to your future career path. So super long with the way of me answering it, but overall the answer is yes, it's a good mentorship.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thanks for hitting on that. Really helped.
Yeah, I think it's important, Rohan, to consider when you look at mentorship. It's like, yeah, you want to form a mentee-mentor relationship with someone, but the way you do that is by demonstrating your competencies and who you are in terms of someone who can operate and execute and things. And you build that trust with a partner, with a manager, and they realize they can rely on you. And then, like Martin said, down the road, you never know whose experience is going to overlap in a way that you can help them or they can help you, and you have that comfort in asking them because you've built the trust previously. So you do need that intimate experience. You can have mentors who can guide you in terms of, interviews and kind of more distance relationships. But when you get in a room with someone, it's about demonstrating your work ethic, your abilities, and building that trust with them directly. So it's an important question as well. I think something else to consider with a lot of firms, it's tangential to mentorship, but not directly related to mentorship, is a lot of the learning and development that they provide to you as a consultant, because they're making an investment in you as an associate, as someone coming into the firm, and hoping that that investment is going to pay off either in your long tenure at the firm or in your ability to drive more client business, and kind of be the person that Martin mentioned, goes back to the client and says, it's a pleasure to work with, McKinsey's a great firm. I want to engage you for future opportunities as well. And a lot of firms will provide you with a budget or with resources to learn and develop and build new skills that, you might not get in a more corporate setting. So I think it's an important thing as well to understand about consulting, that there is a lot of externalities that you get to help push yourself along if you're willing to take advantage of them. But also, as Martin said, right, as you're back in your home city for 3 days, and on a Friday, you probably want to hit the bar with your friends more than you want to go to a workshop on brand strategy. So keep that in mind as well. Any other questions for Martin? And we'll probably wrap up at the top of the hour, just given the setting we're in, and appreciate your time so far. But in case anyone else has any other questions about consulting or anything else, or even Noken, if you want to hear more about what they're building, I'm sure Martin would love to talk about that.
I don't say love to talk about it, but happy to.
Or would it be
Happy to tell them.
the product and encourage you to download it or use it? Any other questions? Otherwise, we can wrap up. So no pressure, but want to give everyone the opportunity.
I have a question, but I'm not sure whether because my connection is not that stable.
If you wanna type it, Sarah, in the chat, we can answer it that way. It looks like she got disconnected as soon as she said her connection was unstable. So she was telling the truth, but we lost her. We'll give her a second to rejoin, and she can chat it to us. Anyone else have any other questions? We'll give her a minute to rejoin, and if not, we'll wrap up. Sarah, if you want to type the message in the chat, or type your.
Yes, I'll do that. Okay.
I do not know where the chat is. I don't really use them. Is it me? I actually can't hear you, Jacob.
Thank you. Yeah, I was muted. I think she's typing. I've got the chat open, so I can ask it once it pops in. But we'll hang out for a minute. Obviously, typing's not as quickly as speaking.
I did send it.
Okay, I don't see it, but maybe try asking it now. We can hear you, so.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is, if if I want, for example, to apply to, let's say, a McKinsey office in the US, is it better for me if I'm based in Lebanon to apply to the Dubai office and then hope to be able to make the move, or to directly apply to the office in the US?
Yes. Yeah, I was involved in a bit with international recruiting. It's, again, take everything as a grain of salt. There is a possibility that maybe you've done some killer things, and there's some killer things on your resume, and maybe the recruitment office has considerations on sourcing their team from a more diverse group than colleges in the New England. So there might be a chance, but overall, more or less, yes, applying to your office where you can compare it against your peers is the best way. And again, speaking only from the McKinsey, if you do well, the firm is going to want to reward you. And often, one way a lot of consultants cash in that is asking to spend their third year or even many years afterwards in a different office. They have a whole setup of how essentially trade associates, like traded cards. And the office of your home office still pays for your salary, but then they can essentially have externships where the Dubai office might send someone and then the New York office sends someone. And so there's opportunities for you to work abroad in that way. But yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. Hopefully she got to hear all that. If not, I'll send the answer and make sure, because it sounds like she might be disconnected again. But great. So if there are no other questions, we'll wrap up here. I know we planned for 11:30, but there's no issues. Everyone get back to their workday. Martin, thanks so much for taking on the brunt of the questions and answers, and appreciate it. If you'd like to talk about Noken or give the 2-sentence pitch what you're building, feel free. Otherwise, don't have to. So I'll leave that to you now. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time, and we'll head out, and everyone have a great rest of the afternoon and weekend.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me. I don't think I really need to go in and pitch it, but if you guys want to check it out, it's www.hellonoken.com. We're a tech travel company trying to innovate the travel agency space. Yeah, again, thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Everyone take care. Thanks for your questions and have a good one. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.